Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, Cesar Espino. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. It is your host, Cesar Espino, and today I have a special guest. He is one of the nation's leading college financial experts. He teaches families the best ways to plan, save, and pay for college, so they can make their children's college dreams come true without wiping out their finance or their retirement. For over 20 years, he has shared his expertise and insights through his private practice as a blogger and a host of the Taming the High Cost of College podcast, and as a presenter at numerous workshops and seminars. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Brad Baldridge. Hey, Brad, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Awesome, awesome. So, Brad, why don't you tell me a little bit more about you? Tell me about your upbringing and where you originally from.
Yeah, so I was born in a log cabin. Oh, no. So yeah, so I've always lived in Wisconsin since I was 2 years old, and we grew up in the little towns in rural Wisconsin, and then got my college degree and moved to the big city. So now I'm in the Milwaukee area and got family and 3 kids and
Yeah.
running a business on college planning. And I guess that's kind of my summary there.
Okay. So, and again, I like to go really deep into this because part of what I believe is when people are doing like things that you're doing, right? You're actually making an impact. You're making a difference. It all started from somewhere. It started from I believe from either your upbringing and or something happened during those years, right? So we always have this idea of when we're growing up is like when I grow up, I want to be this or I want to be that. What was that for you?
Yeah, so and I think this is common as I kind of had a hard left turn in my life, so to speak, where I went off to college and earned an engineering degree and started working at a corporation and realized that I, you know, I enjoyed the engineering side of it. The working at the corporation side wasn't so good.
Yeah.
Um, where didn't see eye to eye with the boss on things like flex time and vacation and all those types of things, and got involved in rental real estate and personal finance, and then kind of switched over to financial advising. 5 years in, I was probably an engineer a little under 5 years, and that was a long time ago. So I was investing in real estate, and I was doing all kinds of things around personal finance, and then just earned my CFP and switched careers. And I guess it's because of, I've always felt, I enjoy solving problems and working with people, and the engineering idea of sitting in the corner and doing your math was never important to me. It was more of a work with people, and so it turned out to be a much better fit. Um, so I
Yeah.
think that's kind of my history as far as how I got to where I am. And then as I got involved in more college planning, I it started to resonate with people. So I kind of focused in on that niche as I taught people more and more about how college worked. The more they listened, so the more I talked, and
Yeah.
next thing I know, there's kind of a specialty that kind of fell out of that a little bit by accident. But then as I realized, I started focusing on it more.
Right. Yeah, and based on that, the fact that in that niche of being able to help, not only students or people in general, right? Parents, families, to not have and feel that they have this financial burden, right? Because that's obviously something huge, right? A lot of times, when people are getting off of high school and are going to college, that's the first thing that people are thinking is like, how much is it going to cost me, or how am I going to be able to take care of those finances, if you're not able to get student loans or things like that, right? I would imagine though, before even getting into any of that, you must have gone through some challenges in your life with, just kind of bouncing back and forth or trying to figure out what was going to be your nature or not. What were some of the major obstacles that you overcame through those moments in your life?
Right. Well, I think and again, being young and then doing financial planning and asking people to trust you and all that. I mean, that's always been a challenge in the financial planning industry is people want to work with the gray-haired guy, not the new guy,
Yeah.
especially if they're a little more mature. So that, I think that's a challenge in general of, you know, you need to have the experience in order to get the experience. You have to find people to work with, and that circular challenge that a lot of industries and a lot of people are dealing with is who's going to talk with this 27-year-old about
Hmm.
their life savings and that type of thing. So I've always, one of my superpowers, I think, is taking complex topics and kind of simplifying them down into something that most people can understand. And I always use the example of a doctor, right? And you can go to the doctor and you say, well, I've got this problem, and he says, oh yeah, based on what's going on, that you have high blood pressure, so we're going to prescribe some medicines. And he's like, here's the FDA report for 23 medicines. Why don't you read them all and tell me which medicine you'd like to take? And then most people will be, no, thanks, doc. Why don't you read them all and tell me which one I should take? Because I could read that stuff, but I wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
And what I'm, what I found is that a lot of people are busy, especially when you have high school kids trying to figure it all out. That, yeah, there's a lot of very technical stuff that you need to understand around need-based aid and merit aid, um, and all the different pieces. But there's also some very general decisions around, well, how are we going to be fair among the kids? Should we spend, X amount of money on college? That seems like too much. Or maybe we should spend more. Or we really love this school, but it's crazy expensive. What are we going to do?
Right.
And there's big life-changing decisions potentially. I always tell people, most of the people I work with have two goals: educate the kids and retire.
Mm.
Or maybe it's the other order. Number one's retire, number two is educate the kids. And, college planning is retirement planning, and retirement planning is college planning. Because if you can do either one of them a little better, then you have more money for the other. But I think a lot of people, as we move into college and trying to figure out how we're going to do that, I think the challenge there is how, you know, what are we willing to sacrifice? And most people say they're not wanting to sacrifice retirement, but when you actually look at what's going on, but sometimes they are. They just don't realize what they're doing and what the long-term ramifications are.
Yeah. If somebody was to come to you and say, "Hey, I need some, college financial advice," like what is the first step, or how do they, like what would be like? I'm new, right? I'm coming to you and say, "Hey, look, I'm trying to get my kid through college. Where did I start? What do I need to do? How can you help me? How can you guide me? What do you tell those parents?"
Right. Well, I mean, I think the first step is to really understand where they are, right? So one obvious way to divide things is what I would call early stage and late stage.
Okay.
So early stages, you've got young kids, or hey, we're pregnant, or you know, and again, college is coming potentially, but you're not visiting colleges. You're not actually in the thick of it yet. You're saying college is going to be part of our future. We just need to kind of bake that into the plan. Should we save some money for college? If so, how much? Are we going to be responsible for college, or are we going to have the kids paid for their own? Which generally is a challenge these days. So yes, parents are going to have to help, most likely. And then we have the late stage, right? Now you've got a high school sophomore, junior, senior, and you literally are trying to figure it all out. So you're visiting colleges, you're trying to understand need-based aid and merit aid, you're all the applications, the students trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. All of it is all kind of there. And even if you did a great job when you had the 2-year old and you saved a whole bunch of money and now you've got a big pot of money for college, that doesn't mean you're done. You still have to do the late stage planning of how do I use this money efficiently? Just because I have it, for most families anyway, just because you have the money doesn't mean you want to spend it foolishly.
Hmm.
And a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, and very similar schools can be at very different prices depending on your situation. So that's the first step is if you're early stage, yes, you should, factor in college. And really the bottom line about early stage is if you think you're going to spend money on college, well, then you just need to spend less money on other things. So if your goal is to pay all of college for all the kids, no matter where they want to go, and it's going to be expensive, then by definition, you're going to live in a smaller house or you're going to drive lesser cars than you would if you chose not to pay for college. I mean, that's just the reality, right? What I see happen though is we get to a family with a 17-year-old that's trying to figure it all out. And let's say they earn $200,000 and they essentially say, everything's really tight. By the time we pay the mortgage and deal with all the kids stuff and everything else, there's not money left over for college. How are we going to make that work? And then, of course, the next family that earns 150,000 looks at that family that earns 200,000 and says, "Well, that's crazy. They have an extra $50,000 a year to pay for college. How can they not be able to pay for it?" But the reality is, as our income grows, so does our lifestyle most of the time.
Right.
And if college isn't baked into the plan a little bit, then college is going to be expensive and painful at just about any income level. I mean, until you're the brain surgeon earning millions, right? And then you just write checks and college is no big deal. But for most families between, 0 and 300,000, college is going to be expensive and is going to be painful. Um, for most. I mean, some families do a great job saving and spread it out the pain and it works really well. But there are also the ones that say things like, well, I drove a crappy car my whole life so that I could save for college. And now I'm happy because I can help pay for college and it's not a big deal. But a lot of families, again, with daycare and sports and all the stuff going on, kids are expensive.
Yeah.
And if you think kids are going to become less expensive as they grow up, they aren't,
Yeah.
right? You go from daycare to sports to schools to, so forth and so on. And it's always easy to find ways to spend your money on the kids or on life in general.
Yeah.
But then when you get to what I would call late stage, well, now you actually have the opportunity to do some planning and really focus in on how to pay for college and make it work and tie it in with retirement if you need to or other goals. Sometimes we're trying to figure out um, some of the setbacks like divorce or inheritance or small business owners and that type of thing, where you not only do you have the normal college stuff, but you've got this extra layer of complexity of, well, who's going to be on the FAFSA in a divorce situation? And often in a divorce situation, the money is even more challenging because you go from one household to two at a time when you're also trying to pay for college or figure out college. And it can be a lot more challenging because there used to be one mortgage, now there's two. There used to be, one expense, now there's two in many categories. That's the downside. The good news is that you might qualify for more aid, depending on, how the divorce happened and how the financial aid forms work out in a particular situation. So sometimes in those tougher situations, there's a little bit of lemonade out of those lemons in that, yes, you know, divorces and some of those things that, financially are often not great, But the small silver lining is, well, because the income is only one parent now, you'll do better on aid. Usually not better enough that, I've had families say something like, "Hey, I've got a plan. Let's get divorced. That will help us pay for college." No, it won't.
Right.
And, but again, if you're good, if you're in the thick of it anyway, then take advantage of it. But
Yeah.
it's not a strategy that would work. You're going to end up costing you. It's kind of like with saying, "Well, I'm just not going to earn the income, so that way I get more aid." It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you give up $1,000 of income and you get $200 of aid and you save $100 in taxes. You're
Yeah.
still $700 behind. So you're better off earning the money. It's just if we can plan how to earn the money and do it as efficient as possible, then maybe we can make that better.
Yeah. Now, for the early stage, right? People that either are either going to have kids or they have young kids. Do you actually build them a financial plan, or is it a matter of just having a conversation and say, hey, you got to just get to a point where you're able to save or live below your means, or whatever that might be, or do you actually build them a financial plan from whatever age the kids might be, whether they're newborns all the way through college?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so we're not really building a college plan at that level. We're more building a overall financial plan,
Got it.
which again would include college, but it also includes
All the
whatever else
rest.
is going on, right? But and again, if you can be a little more efficient in the types of insurance that you buy, a little more efficient on vacations or cars or well, there's all kinds of financial decisions where, sometimes we just do it poorly.
Mhm.
And, as an example, if you're capable of putting money into your 401k and making sure you get the match and you do that from day one, that's a lot of money that over your earning career can make a big difference. A lot of us don't do that starting at 19 or 23 or whenever it is we go get our first real job because our salary is not real high and we're not willing to give up a little bit. So we go 5 or 10 years and skip it. Well, if you just that one decision can cost you a little bit, and in the end, if you can just do everything, like I said, a little more efficient, that's what's important. And then families need to decide, when and how much are we going to save for college? So there's, I, as an example, if you had a kid going off to college today, if you save $200 a month and you got a reasonable rate of return, you'd have a, about a third of your state schools covered,
Mm.
maybe a little bit more, depending on what state you live in and that kind of stuff.
So
And
where
then
would
the
you put that?
students,
Where would you put that $200? Like obviously not on a regular savings. Would it be a CD, life insurance that gives you living benefits? Like infinite banking. Like where would you put
right,
those $200?
right. So if there's college savings plans of various sorts, and depending on your state, that might make sense from a tax perspective or other things. Or you might just put it into an investment, a stock or bonds or mutual funds or that type of thing. And where it's kind of separated from your other finances and it's kind of dedicated to college. What's good about that is once you put it in the college bucket, it's very sticky. It stays there because you've in your mind it's not your money anymore. It's for college and you're not going to raid it. But you could just put it in a general investment and saying, well, this is our investment. So that when we get to 17, we have $100,000 in a general investment. And if we need it for college, we'll take it. If we don't need it for college, we can use it for something else. But it's not dedicated to college. So there's pros and cons to making those decisions. And sometimes you do both, right? Put half of it into dedicated college money, and half of it into some other investment. Because, there's been a lot of disruption, certainly in the music industry and in the publishing industry and newspapers and that kind of stuff. Theoretically, education is also potentially going to get disrupted by technology and that type of thing. And hasn't happened quite yet, but it could. And we're seeing a lot of differences, so college may be different. If you had a 2-year-old today, college could be drastically different when you get there. And some parents are like, have concerns about, well, if I put all this money away for college, and then what if they don't go to college?
Yeah.
Then what? Well, then there might be some penalties or other reasons that we would have, you know, be unhappy with that decision. So then how do we, work that out in order to find that balance where, and again, so some, if that's your feeling that, well, I don't necessarily want to dedicate it, well, then you can just build your net worth, build your assets so that you have some flexibility when you get there. But I think that's the key, right? Is to realize that when we get to college, if it's similar to the way it is today, you know, we're going to need $100,000 for our student to go to a state school, maybe a little more to go something else for the 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, if that's our target, if that 100,000 is in dedicated college, fine. If that's $100,000 in home equity and we're going to borrow that out, that might work. If that 100,000 is in some investments that we can liquidate, and I've seen families like use real estate, say, well, our goal is to have this property paid off by the time college starts, and then all the rent can go directly to college. Does that work? Probably. And it's not the only way, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of different ways to do it, but if you're actually just consciously figuring it out, that's this key step. A lot of people kind of ignore it, and then it sneaks up on them.
Yeah. In terms of, from your perspective, your experience, I mean, are there a lot of, I guess, families that parents specifically, like, what is the percentage of actually parents paying for their kids' colleges versus a kid getting their, paying for the college through their own means, whether it's work, getting student loan, things like that? Is there a big proportion on that?
Right. So I think the reality is parents that can afford to help, if you have higher incomes, you're going to almost have to help because of the way that the system works.
Okay.
So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the numbers. So the average private or public school, the average state school is about $27,000. And that's the total cost. So that's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer, and pizza. It's the
Mhm.
whole cost of a typical college student. And, so it's about, 11,000 tuition, 11,000 room and board, and 5,000 other expenses. And those numbers fluctuate. New York and California, that some of their schools are much more expensive, certainly in the ones in the big cities. And the North Dakota and some of the plain states might be a little less. Iowa might be a little less.
Mhm.
And it just depends on your state and how much, the state government helps pay, et cetera. But that's kind of what we're up against. Now, if your family earns, $150,000 or 100,000 or more, you're not likely to get a lot of aid. So you're going to pay full price at your state school. And that's a great exercise for people that are doing in late stage planning is figure out what would it cost to go to the flagship school, you know, University UVA or University of Michigan or University of Illinois. And a lot of times the top school is a little more expensive than the rest of the schools, not always.
Mhm.
But what would that cost? Because that's usually going to be the price to beat. So let's say it's 27,000, but the actual bill is going to be 22,000. Then there's another 5,000 for books
Mhm.
and travel and cell phones and dates and laundry and all that. And a lot of that stuff is already paid for anyway. So it's not really an added expense. It's just already being covered some other way. Um, so if you're going to need to come up with actual bills of 22,000, well, the student can only borrow 5,500 typically in their own name. And if you're not going to get any other aid, that means the parents would have to come up with the rest. Now, often students can earn, let's say, another 5,000 working summers and weekends. And, so in round numbers, the student's good for 10,000. So then the parents would have to cover, in that 27,000 example, the parents would have to cover 17. So that's the higher incomes, the 150, 100,000 and up. If your income's more like, 40,000, well, then you qualify for federal aid and state aid and some of those other things. And maybe you get $10,000 in grants. So now school, instead of costing the parents 15, 20,000, may cost the parents 5 or 6 or 8,000. But of course, 5 or 6 or 8,000 when you're only earning 40,000 is
A lot.
painful.
Yeah.
And when you're earning 150,000, 20,000 is painful.
Yeah.
And then it can go up from there, right? That's kind of the low cost option. Then many parents, many families would choose private schools of some sort and consider doing other options. And now all of a sudden you could spend 40,000 or 50 or 80,000 per year on school. And again, I'm not saying you should, but you could. There's many schools that are approaching 90,000 per year now.
Yeah. And then I have here in my notes that you mentioned that the students can attend a private college for about the same price as if they were to go to a public university. How is that so?
Right. Okay. So we just talked about obviously the state school average 27,000. The average private school is about 57,000. So it costs about 30,000 more. But the average aid package at a private school is also about 20,000 more than the aid package at the state school.
Hmm.
So some private schools, let's say they total cost is 65 instead of 25, so they're 40,000 more. But in some instances, you may get an additional 20, 30, $40,000 of aid, which brings your net cost down to being very competitive with the public schools. So I've seen situations where we can go to this public school for 26, or we can go to that public school for 23, but we can also go to this private school for 26 and that private school for 22. And then, of course, maybe a couple of the private schools just aren't in the running. We can go to that public school, that one's 40, or that private school, that one's 48, and that one over here is 78. And
Yeah.
and then families have to decide. And most of the time, the 78,000 is when you've got other low cost options, might get crossed off the list. But I have seen situations where families are saying, a couple of them are 25,000, a couple of them are 30,000, and one of them's 35,000. And which is, again, the Murphy's Law would say, well, the one we like best, of course, is the most expensive one with the 35,000.
Yeah.
And then you have to decide, well, is it worth spending an extra 5 or 10,000 for a college? And sometimes the answer is yes. And then families go ahead and do it. Just like we all don't drive the cheapest cars we can find, we find the cars that we need to meet our needs. Whether, I have 3 kids, so I needed a minivan when the kids were young.
Yeah.
And they cost more than the typical car, but that's the way it is, right? That's the cost of having kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Same thing around college of, you know, these colleges are more expensive, but they're also a better fit for whatever reason. So we're going to go ahead and stretch a little and spend a little bit more.
Yeah. So tell me, parents come to you, like, tell me about your services or how you're able to, how you help parents that come to you. How does that work?
Right. So most of the families I'm working with, we're doing what I would call late stage planning, which is, again, you've got
Hmm.
ideally you want to start earlier. You got a high school sophomore, but we can help if you've got a junior or senior. A lot of times for the senior, where it's more damage control because it's really late in the game, and usually there's some issue that pops up that we need to try and figure out. But if you're doing good planning and you start a little bit earlier, we help families figure out, what types of schools are a good fit. We help you understand, what the net cost will be. We'll help you work through the state schools, and again, lots of families are saying we don't really want to go to the state school, or we want to go to a state school in some other state, and then we have to pay the out of state. And, then that's all doable. It's just a matter of understanding what your options are. But finding schools that are a good cost, and then from there, pay that cost as efficient as possible. So, the 2 steps, here's a school that's 70,000, but after aid net, it's 25. Here's another school that's net 28, and here's a school that's net 43. Well, we're going to end up paying for one of those schools. And then how do we actually pay that net amount, whether that's mom and dad's money or the student's money or loans or all the other things. So there's kind of big picture strategy around our belief as parents is we're going to pay for all of college, or our belief as parents is it's a partnership between the parents and the student's going to pay some, and the The parents are going to pay some. And then we get into the very specific. If you do this, you'll get a tax deduction. If you do that, you'll get more financial aid, right? Need-based aid is a calculation based on the parents' income and assets and the students' income and assets and a number of other factors. But for a lot of families, it might make sense to shift money from one pocket to another in order to get more aid. For other families, it doesn't matter what you do, you're just not going to get aid. So shifting it around, people will say things like, well, if I have this money in the bank, they're going to count it against me. And it's like, yes. And if you move it, it will make things better. For
Yeah.
some families, it's yes, they will count it against you, but if you move it, it won't get any better because they're also looking at your $300,000 salary, and that alone disqualifies you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where your money is. You can shift it around all day long, but as long as you have that high salary, you're not going to get aid no matter what you do.
Yeah.
So don't worry about where your money is in that case. You need to focus on other strategies in order to help pay for college. And about half the people I work with qualify for aid, and about half don't. So
Yeah.
there's, you do different things in a different order potentially, depending on, where your family lies in the overall spectrum. And, so for most families, it all turns out a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the big challenges out there is a lot of families say things like, well, my brother-in-law did it this way and it worked out well. It's like, yeah, well, your brother-in-law has a certain financial profile and that student had a certain academic profile. And so, yeah, those strategies would work for that situation, but you're not in that situation. Your student is different, your income is different, your different state, whatever it might be. So most of the time, things will be a little bit different. And that's where I think a lot of families struggle is how do they get quality information and how do they, do the big picture planning and then get into the strategies and tactics of, okay, we need to move this money or we need to fill out the financial aid forms a certain way, or we need to negotiate with the school, or which of these opportunities will be a good fit for us.
Yeah, no, for sure. So do you people that come to you, do you do it on a case by case basis type of service? Is it a one time fee, or how's
Right,
the structure for people that might be interested in learning more about you?
right. So generally, I charge a fee for a college plan, whatever that and usually it focuses on the students that are involved, but it would include the whole family. So you have a family where you've got two in high school and two in middle school. Well, the kids in high school, they really are in the middle of it, right? They're figuring out what they want to be when they grow up and that kind of stuff. But the plan would have to include the younger kids because most parents aren't willing to say, sorry, Becky, we ran out of money, so you can't go to college. You need to, figure out how you're going to be fair for all the kids. So that's part of the planning process is you want to include them all. But usually it's the oldest that are in the middle of actually doing the actual visits and all the real technical stuff with the understanding that the younger kids will get their turn and we need to incorporate them as part of the plan. um, so it's a very fluid situation where we would work potentially for a year or two on getting the older ones and then repeat it if we needed to with the next students.
Awesome. If people want to find out and connect with you and look at all the things you have to offer, where can they find you?
Right. So everything we do is at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, which is our website. We've got a podcast there. We've got a number of free resources of email, newsletter, calculator to figure out need-based aid, scholarship guide for busy parents in order to help understand how scholarships work. And then if you're interested in talking, our phone number's there. You can schedule appointments through some links there and that type of thing as well.
Awesome. So, Brad, seems like you obviously had something going on for yourself and you have things figured out. One of the things that I'm interested in knowing is what things do you do on a day-to-day basis to kind of keep you up and running in a positive state of mind, or even putting you in this state of mind that you're in right now? What work have you done for yourself too?
Right. So I think I do a lot of reading around, sometimes for pleasure, but often I'm reading books around, motivation and leadership and all those types of things. And I find that, um, kind of spend a lot of time working in the business and, doing the day-to-day planning, but occasionally you got to spend some time thinking about, well, bigger picture of why am I doing this and
Right.
how can I do it better? And, you know, some of that type of thing. So I think, 4 Hour Work Week and there's a number of great books, all the way back to Stephen Covey, all the way
Yeah.
through, you know, some of the more modern things that are coming out. And, sometimes it's maybe not quite in the same field as I'm in, because there's a lot of times you can take something from a different field and move it into financial planning, or take a financial planning idea and move it into sales and marketing, or again, there's a little bit of crossover. So I find listening to podcasts or reading books that aren't necessarily exactly what I'm doing
Got it.
makes sense as well.
Yeah. Besides reading, do you do anything else? Any other habits that you have on a day-to-day basis?
Not, well, some that I've tried, but habits are tough
Yeah.
and keeping them going. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I try and stay positive
yeah.
and again, just try and get a little bit of reading and a little bit of that going. And then I enjoy what I do, so that helps as well. Whereas I don't feel like I'm working most of the time. I'm just, doing what I do, talking with my clients and prospects and talking about something I love to talk about. So it doesn't feel too much like work for me.
That's huge. As a matter of fact, I think that when you're doing something that you're passionate about and you enjoy, um, again, like you said, it doesn't seem like you're working. It seems like uh, just playtime, right? And just having fun, which allows for more of a healthier life for you, and allows you to be less stressed when it comes down to that. So that's
Right.
huge. My last question for you is, for the people that are watching us or listening to us, if they're going through any challenge, whatever challenge that might be, what is one advice that you can give them so they can start overcoming that challenge?
Right. I think most of the time it's not as bad as you think it is. Where, I mean, I work with families all the time overcoming the college challenge.
Yep.
And when you first run into it, it seems daunting and huge. And I mean, the reality of it is, if you look at a college campus that's full of students, so most families figure it out somehow.
Mm,
Now, if so if you're up against something, whatever you're up against, there's others that have probably solved it, or if you get creative, there's probably a way to solve it. But take a deep breath and really think it through, and then get out there and find some answers, find someone that can help, you know, and you know, I think again, a lot of people get bogged down and stressed out and kind of have a defeated attitude before they've even really looked into what the options are and what else, they might be able to consider.
yeah, I love that. Definitely love that. Well, Brad, thank you again for being here. Really appreciate all your insight, and definitely looking forward for this to help a lot of families that are going through that, and people that are trying to get into college. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for the rest of you guys, do me a favor. Please make sure that you share this message because somebody needs to hear this. And I'll see you guys in the next episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Cesar Espino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you've tuned into this podcast. You can find me at your favorite podcast platform where you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. And to learn more about myself, my services, you can find me at www.CesarRespino.com, or you can also find me at your social media. Thanks for joining me, and I am looking forward to having you at the next episode. And know you truly can overcome anything.